So what I'm talking about is aggregating text, taking a whole bunch of text and putting them together into one big, what linguists call a corpus. The corpus is simply a big bunch of texts that are assembled according to a sampling logic. So there's some sort of conceptual limit to the number of texts that you're assembling, and then you perform various operations on that text to arrive at conclusions that are empirically defensible. That's corpus linguistics. Corpus linguistics is based on, thank you. So it's based on John Gilbert from Ferreth. Ferreth is a linguist, and he was famous for saying you can know a term by the company it keeps. What does that mean precisely? This actually comes from, well, that term has actually several aspects. One of them simply means use, the fallacy of the dictionary, right? You go to a big dictionary and you think, wow, okay, this is a codification of our language. Okay, this is authoritative. If the dictionary says it means this, it must mean that. Absolutely not. Okay, so for linguists, it's just not the case. A linguist simply codifies, a dictionary simply codifies what is at any given moment. Dictionaries change. They're not normative in any sense. They're supposed to be descriptive. They're often treated as normative by people like you and me who insist on correct definitions. But say, for example, democracy, right? So I went around the room and asked all three of you who showed up for my presentation, what does democracy mean, right? Even though there's several definitions in the dictionary, I will get as many definitions from you as there are people in this room. Now, does it follow that you don't know what democracy means? No. Does it follow that the term has no meaning? No. Does it follow that we don't know how to use the term? No, none of that follows. We all know how to use the term in sentences, such that other people will understand what we're saying. In other words, the terms derive their meaning from context that they're in. That's how we parse out what somebody means by democracy in a conversation. In other words, meaning derives from use, from our use of a term over time. As the way we use terms changes over time. Thank you very much. Oh, yes. Much better. Okay, we can know a term by the company's keeps, meaning its use, forms and formulae. This all comes from research on the so-called Homeric problem or Homeric question that was asked by people in my discipline, English, long ago, and the question was this. Okay, so we have this Homeric corpus, right? So the Homeric corpus for us is just the Iliad and the Odyssey, but we know that there was actually a whole cycle. There was a huge volume of stuff that was attributed to Homer, and according to tradition, there was just one Homer. And so the question is, how could this guy have memorized all this stuff? And a lot of people just dismissed it altogether. The Homeric question is not a question at all. Obviously, we have different notions of what it means to be an author from our ancient brothers and sisters. Obviously, there were a whole bunch of Homers, or we're just attributing all this stuff to one person. The problem is, if you look at the stylistic character of the Homeric texts, it's clear it's either a bunch of guys that were really tight, or it was one guy. It's stylistically consistent. So the question becomes, okay, so how was one guy who was supposed to be blind, by the way, he couldn't carry around notes, he wasn't reading to you, so how could one guy memorize all this stuff? Milman Parry and Alfred Pre-Lord went off into the world to find people who still practiced epic poetry. These were people, these were bards, rhapsodes of the same tradition, and they still existed at the time, at the turn of the last century, in what we now call the Balkans, right? These were people that had memorized just huge epic poems that were very important to the national identities of the people at the time, and they studied them. How is it possible? Okay, so given the limitations of the medium, given the limitations of our memories and so forth, how is it possible that I can't remember my own address and I forget how to tie my shoes? These guys can memorize what's bigger than an encyclopedia. Well, it turns out they kind of weren't. Okay, so what they would do is, and this is Alfred P. Lord writes this in a brilliant book, writes this up in a brilliant book called The Singer of Tales, in which he compares Homer's corpus, the way Homer wrote, to the way these Balkan bards wrote, recited their poetry and so forth. What he discovered was they really weren't memorizing text like we would try to memorize a sentence word for word. Okay, the way we try to memorize is just horrible. It just goes against the way we like to memorize things. They would memorize key themes. So if you read Homer critically, you'll discover that it's actually 3 or 4 episodes that are all very visual in their content. There's the Shield of Achilles. There's the games on the beach. There's the argument between Agamemnon and Achilles. And the way the poet would put it together is by taking all these pre-assembled forms and sticking them together. Now, if any of you have read Homer, these terms never get out of your head. You remember rosy-fingered Dawn, gray-eyed Athena, resourceful Odysseus. These are the epithets that the poet uses, assembles on the fly, to create these thematic wholes that assemble the narrative. In other words, what they discovered was, they weren't really memorizing a whole poem. They were remembering 3 or 4 images, and they had all these stock formula that they would stick together on the fly, composing it on the fly with their audience, to create the impression of the beauty of this poem. Now, linguists after Parry and Alfred P. Lord and so forth began to apply those notions to the way we ordinarily talk. And what they discovered was, everybody talks this way. This isn't something special to poets, or oral poets, I should say, poets from oral societies, not at all. We all tend to think in 5 to 7 word bursts. We do not think one word at a time. And we tend to think in cliches. We tend to think in forms and formulae that we stick together on the fly. And cliches like on the fly, or stick together. And if you actually examine them, they have metrical properties. They are rhythmically quite satisfying. And we stick them together, and this is the way we're able to organize, to compose, if you will, on the fly. Now, what does that mean for spoken language? What it means is, so given that meaning is used, given that the meaning of a term develops as we use a term, in its context, in our social relations and so forth, and given the fact that we stick them together in these forms and formulae, then it follows logically that we can learn a lot about a term, the cultural meaning that we're assigning to a term, by comparing it to the terms that keep appearing around it. So one of the early studies in corpus linguistics was simply investigating the feminist critique of language, that language tends to favor males. And what they discovered was, the notion is collocation, right? What collocates or collocates with another term. What they discovered was verbs of cognition or affect tend to collocate with female pronouns. She thought, she believed, she felt. Whereas transitive verbs tend to collocate, that is, tend to appear in the neighborhood of males. He did, he performed, he kicked, he moved. In other words, if you're doing something in the world, that tends to collocate with male pronouns to a statistically significant degree. If it's a verb of cognition or affect, it tends to collocate with female pronouns to a statistically significant degree. So this is what? This is using corpus linguistics to investigate the cultural meaning of a term. Certainly if you were to go to your dictionary and look up every verb, would you find information telling you, this tends to collocate with male pronoun? No. That's something you actually have to take a huge text corpus, a huge sample to figure out. That's what aggregation does for you. It allows you to detect these sorts of trends in a large corpus of data. How is a text different from a graffiti wall? So imagine in your head a graffiti wall. A graffiti wall is what? So say a big rock face on the highway, and you see a bunch of people spray painted different stuff there. Some of it kind of colorful, some of it quite pedestrian. But none of the text fits together. Nobody's trying to write a text. What makes a text different than a graffiti wall? In a text, everything kind of sticks together. What makes a text is how the terms of a text relate together. Now, linguists and rhetoricians like myself have lots of different ways of talking about how things relate together. I have syntagm, paradigm, grammar, lexis, syntaxis, theme, reme, discourse. Generally, when we're talking about grammar, we're talking about sentence-level constructions, how things stick together in a sentence. In English, for example, we tend to favor subject, verb, object constructions. A linguist would call that theme, reme, or topic, object. What is thematized is your grammatical subject. What is rematized, what becomes the object, the things that are acted upon, is in your predicates. It tells you a lot about a cultural theme or a cultural symbol or a term, where it tends to fall in a sentence. We tend to stress the beginning parts of sentences. Those are the themes, those are our topics, those are what we thematize. Syntagm speaks to simply the terms that we like to stick together. A syntagm is a phrase of some sort. Syntagmatic relations are relations of contiguity, where we're sticking things together. Paradigmatic relations are relations of class or continuity. Okay, so a relation of class might be every term that we associate with a tree, a trunk, a leaf, and so forth. These are paradigmatic relations, and we can look at paradigmatic relations among terms as well. But these are all the sorts of conceptual resources that we bring to bear on a text to do what? To interpret that text once we've aggregated it on some conceptual grounds. Now, in this case, what I'm doing is concordancing. Okay, so what is a concordance? And I actually have, what is a concordance? If you, people who study the Bible a lot know exactly what a concordance is. Let's open this in a new tab if I can. If I hold this right, it will actually, here we go. This is Strong's exhausted and expanded concordance of the Bible, right? What does this do for you? So say you're studying the Bible. Most, by the way, most of the conceptual tools in textual analysis come from studying the Bible. Why is that the case? Because it's a big text, and people have spent many hundreds of years trying to figure it out. And about the middle of the 18th century, a bunch of Germans decided that, you know what, this text seems to be, even though the tradition tells us Moses wrote the Pentateuch or the first 5 books, the Torah, it seems to be of multiple authorship on various grounds. And this was higher criticism and so forth. And they began to look at the text not so much as what it says as to how it's constructed at the term level. What a concordance is, and concordance comes out of this sort of research, this sort of activity, what a concordance is simply taking every instance of a term. Okay, so say you're doing a word study on the word faith. Okay, well, faith is kind of a vexed term. Everybody's, if I went around the room and said, what is faith? So everybody come up with a different definition. Again, that doesn't mean the term is evacuate of meaning. It just means that, yeah, we all have different ways of using it in sentences and so forth. Well, the question then becomes, well, what does it mean here? What does it mean in the context of this text? Well, a way of unpacking that is looking at every instance of the word in its context. What words, what themes tend to assemble around this term? That way you can unpack the meaning of the term based on the principles of Freudian linguistics. And I'm pointing at the screen, but I'm not on that screen anymore. That meaning is use, and that we know a term by the company that it keeps. Here we go. Now, what concordancing software does for you is it produces a concordance of a body of text. So you have a bunch of text, and I have 2 texts that I'm going to show you. And what it does is it takes that text and it indexes it. Okay, so it gives you every instance of every word, and you can follow every word. And it also gives you an analysis of word frequencies. Okay, in other words, how often certain words appear. There's an empirical notion of keyness, right? Key terms. You compare one text with another text to determine, okay, what are the key terms in this text, according to various statistical tests. A key test in one corpus a key term that we're going to look at in one of the corpus is simply sharing. It shows up to a statistically significant degree and in a way that commands attention from other parts of the text. It is a term that does what? Organizes the rest of the text. And you can figure this out empirically without interpretation, just based on how many words appear and the frequencies of the neighborhood in which they're appearing, right? So this term appears here in the neighborhood of this term, and then the next section where this term appears, this term's here again, this term's here. We'll be looking at precisely that sort of thing. And that's what a concordance software does. Okay, so a corpus, sampling logic. A corpus, if you're making your own corpus, now if you're doing just a general study, there are corpuses available, right? So there's the blue corpus, the brown corpus, and so forth. These are big, huge, honking texts that linguists have assembled, right? So if you want to talk about English speakers in general, there's the blue or the brown corpus, where it's just a gargantuan number of texts, both written and spoken, and you can do any number of analyses to discover how spoken English is changing over time, for example, or the cultural meanings that attach to a term, for example. For me, what I'm looking at are more minor sorts of text, and by minor I mean smaller. I'm looking at Zukerberg, the Zukerberg corpus, right? Mark Zukerberg, the guy who gave us Facebook. I love this guy. I hate this guy. So anyway, a few weeks ago, Zukerberg announces major changes to Facebook, right? Now, the sampling logic I used was, okay, so the whole web's abuzz talking about this, right? And I wanted to, could I sample the whole web? No, not within my means. Okay, so how can I come up with an empirically justifiable way of reducing the data, yet coming up with a study that's defensible? And so what I did was I outsourced the problem to an aggregator called TechMeme. TechMeme is a great aggregator. What TechMeme does is it follows the top blogs in technology. And by top, I mean the ones that everybody is following. And then it gives you this sort of visual. If you go to TechMeme, I'm not going to bring it up now, but if you go to TechMeme, please go to TechMeme. It's a great service. It gives you the top ranked blogs, right? So the blogs that appear, or the posts that appear at the top of the page, of the TechMeme page, are the ones that are getting the most attention. The day after Zukerberg announces his changes to Facebook, there were 5 entries in TechMeme about that. So I allowed TechMeme, which means I allowed the crowd of people who are interested in this issue to decide what the text would be. I just stripped those out in terms of their text and the discussions that were attaching to them. That is the people who were responding to these texts, and they became my sample, and I'll be showing you that in a moment. There's a wonderful resource online that has all of Obama's speeches from 2005 to 2009. Now, why is that significant? That's before he went to office. That's after his 2004 speech, right? In 2004, he gives this great speech at the Democratic Convention, and he enters the national scene. And at the time, people were saying, "Oh God, this guy is presidential. He's going all the way. This is but he wasn't president yet. So between 2005 and 2009 is kind of a significant period. And I used this. I developed this corpus. I just stripped all the text out, put it in the concordancer. Why? Because I use it as a basis of comparison when I'm looking at his more concurrent speeches. Okay. So in other words, there are 2 things I'm looking for. Is this theme that I'm looking at now, okay, that he's developing now in his speech, is it consistent with his earlier understanding of this issue, or his earlier development of this issue, or is it different? Either way tells me something. Okay, if it's consistent, that tells me something. If it's different, that tells me something. Okay, so it gives me an analytical basis for comparison when I'm interpreting his more recent speeches. So the Zukerberg, this is what I'm using a concordance software called concordancer. That's a very creative name for a concordance software, I think. But what it gives you is what's really nice is it can give you a web version, right? So this is what a concordance kind of looks like. Benward. Benward is one of the writers who talks about the new Facebook. I love this. Fail. A lot of strong opinions about the new Facebook. Okay, so look, 1984 shows up. Click. Okay, so this is somebody actually referencing the novel, I should think. But anyway, so what you can do with this is you have a term, right? So one of the terms that keeps showing up is sharing. So let's go here to sharing. Next section. If only I knew how to spell. Oh yeah, sharing. Here we go. Share. You have several instances. You have sharing, shares, shared, share / like, right? Share. Okay. Well, linguists would call this a lemma. Okay. A lemma is what? It's a class of terms that are basically all the same. They all follow from the same root, right? So the root here is sharing or share. Click that. And yeah, there we go. Okay. So in red, you have every instance of the word sharing. Here you see the neighborhood and so forth. Down here you have the full text, and you can click it in and so forth. But this, so you want to see it in its text, you can go here. This is, again, this is the web version. If you were using the software, it would be different. But this web version makes it shareable, so I can bring it here and show you guys without installing the software. Oh, I should show you that one. That's interesting. Why can I not Alt-Tab on this machine? Okay, so here's Obama's speeches. Let's just open a new tab. Let's not open a new tab. Let's open a new window. Oh, I've lost it altogether. Oh, there we are. I seem to have lost it. Okay,
That's it, isn't it?
What's what? Is this, okay, let's get rid of this. The previous tab is, yeah, there we go. Good afternoon. Yeah, this is Obama. My grandfather signed up for the war. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at here is the term CEO, which, by the way, has a very small lemma. Next section, it's just CEO and CEOs. But what's interesting is when you do corpus linguistics, when you start performing corpus linguistics, a small thing like adding, like a plural, can mean all the difference in the world in how the term is used. So we'll be looking at that in a moment. And I think I actually made my presentation go away, which is a problem. Sort of bring it back. Yeah, corpus linguistics presentation. There we are. Okay, sampling logic, got that. Obama and the CEOs. Okay, so the problem. The reason why this is interesting to me, okay, Obama is perceived in the press as being hostile to business. Okay, that's the perception. And he's been dealing with that for a while. And he's had several sort of summits with CEOs. He actually organizes summits with them and so forth and gives these long pronouncements. And so the interesting thing to me is, okay, so how does he understand CEOs in his earlier speeches and so forth? Now, before he became president, how did they appear in his thoughts and views publicly given? Now, a more recent example in his thoughts and views is this. This came from one of his summits. He's giving an interview where he's talking about one of his summits with CEOs. And so what is the model of a post-bubble economy? He's giving his theory of a post-bubble economy. It's sort of disappointing to me. He no longer talks about the post-bubble economy. This was very 2009, 2010. He doesn't talk about this anymore. But anyway, but at the time he was still developing this theory of a post-bubble economy. And he says, basically in the second paragraph, this matches up perfectly with what those CEOs were saying. He had this breakfast with lunch, I should say, with CEOs. And what they were telling him was, and the story they told him was, the story of the 80s, right? In the 80s, we had this crisis in U.S. productivity. CEOs put their heads together and they solved that problem. Is Obama's account. Now, that's an interesting account. It's not inaccurate. But what that account seems to leave out is, does anybody remember how the productivity revolution really played out in the 80s, right? Do you remember movies like Pretty Woman? You know, like there was a corporate raider in that film, you know, with who was seduced to the light side by a prostitute. But anyway, so what happens in the 80s is, so there's a financial services revolution that results in junk bonds and so forth, that makes it possible for corporate raiders to buy out corporations. So underperforming corporations were just quickly liquidated because of financial instruments that didn't exist at the time. And this resulted in what? A productivity revolution that takes place more in the 90s, right? So it's a story that's not inaccurate, but it sort of covers over all the turmoil that occasioned those gains in productivity. And and it's also a story that does what? It depicts CEOs as more agentive than the alternative story would have it. Okay, were CEOs actually thinking up brilliant thoughts about how to improve U.S. productivity in the 1980s? If you go back if you go back and look at the actual story, the underperformers were getting liquidated, and there were innovators. But it was more, it looked more like Darwin's survival of the fittest than it looked like, okay, let's all sit down at a conference table and come up with brilliant ideas. What in Obama's stories about CEOs seem to take on the persona of political agents. They're acting, they're thinking, they're deciding, they're legislating. They're not behaving like the CEOs of, of the alternative story, where they're actually getting liquidated, fired, wiped out, bankrupted, bought out, with jobs and so forth being shipped overseas. Now, the reason why this is important to me is agenda setting, right? So every time Obama talks about CEOs, and this is true of this is true of Harper, of any other sort of political figure and so forth. In media studies, we call it agenda setting. What journalists do is they, when they're writing stories and so forth, Obama just mentioned CEOs. Hey, let's follow that. Let's piggyback on that and write stories about CEOs. Let's talk, well, what angle can we bring in? Well, how much are they making? Where do they live? What are they doing? What is it about CEOs that makes them... So this sets the agenda for the media. when Obama starts talking about CEOs, it's a good predictor for CEOs entering the media more generally in various stories and so forth. So again, it behooves us to understand, okay, so what is his understanding of CEOs and so forth? CEOs and value of work. So if you go to the corpus, let's go to the corpus and look at CEOs. This is the one thing, this is something I really like about Obama. Terribly consistent. This goes back to 2005. So if you look at almost every instance of CEOs, the well-connected CEOs and higher guns, the nation's CEOs could bring about a quicker results than a battalion of lawyers, unions and CEOs. Wait, let's go to CEO. Yeah, here we go. Okay, if CEO pay keeps rising, CEOs just walked off with a multi-million-dollar bonus, CEO dumps your pension, CEO bonuses, CEO compensation. She was fired by a CEO, tough talking about CEO pay. In other words, the word CEO collocates with what? Compensation. Okay, CEOs in almost every instance where it's a singular version of CEO, it's CEOs are getting paid too much, or CEOs are getting paid more than you, or CEOs are denying you something that's good for you, like your pension. Okay, and this is just wonderfully consistent. And it actually comes up again, so when Obama goes on the road a few weeks ago to start touting his job bill, right? He goes on, right now it's the Pass the Bill tour. He gets into his armored bus and he's crossing the United States. Pass this bill right now. And part of it is the so-called Buffett rule, right? The Buffett rule says what? That CEOs should not be taxed less than their secretaries. Now, in terms of agenda setting, think about the OSW, the Occupy Wall Streeters. That's a big part of their message, right? You just tax the rich, and so they're attacking CEOs and so forth and so on. They're repeating, so this is part of the agenda setting function. And these are themes that go way back in Obama's history, and that's why it's kind of not interesting to me. Why? Because it's so frighteningly consistent. What's interesting to me, theoretically, would be the exceptions. When does he talk about CEOs and it's not about this? Well, that's why I brought up the other article where he's talking about CEOs and he's actually telling a story about productivity and saying, yeah, we need to apply the same productivity principles to government. Wait. I have examples. I hate not having Alt Tab. So one thing I like about Windows is Alt Tab, and Alt Tab went away. Does it say new Windows or something, or did I just screw something up? Where are we? Here we go. Okay, so here are some examples of the US president using the term CEO in ways that don't talk about compensation. Okay, so this generally shows up when he's using the term in the plural. And you'll notice something here. So the reason I say from category to catalog, generally we think of terms as categories. Okay, say apple. Apple is actually a category of appleness. There are different kinds of apples. It's a type token distinction. Now, in rhetoric, when we talk about catalogs, okay, a catalog is when you go into a list. So if you go back to Homeric poetry and so forth, there's the catalog of ships. It's one of those big themes in there, right? So where he talks about the ships that showed up at Troy, and he gives you this long list of every Aegean people that showed up, and apparently everyone did. But here you have the same sort of gesture. In other words, the word CEO in the plural tends to be cataloged with other players. Okay, so CEOs, shareholders, financiers. Rules of the game have changed. Silicon Valley CEOs, that's its exception. CEOs could bring about quicker results. Democrats and Republicans, small business owners, and CEOs have all come to agree. We are at a rare moment of growing consensus among Democrat, Republicans, unions and CEOs, evangelical Christians, and military experts. Do they hang out together, right? Military experts and evangelicals? Yeah, we can agree, we military evangelical. But anyway, so CEOs to shareholders, financiers to factory workers. These are instances of catalogs. Several. There are also instances here of what? So CEOs behaving as political agents. That is, making decisions that are not necessarily market-based, but are the right thing to do. So in this study, this study is still in development. What I'm doing is comparing these thematic developments with what? With the speeches he's making about okay, Occupy Wall Street, and his 2 summits, he's had 2, by the way, 2 summits with CEOs to arrive at what sort of conclusions, okay? So what is the relation that obtains between his understanding of CEOs, chief executive officers, and their function, both their social function and their material function as actors in the economy, and what does this mean according to his evolving understanding of the political community? So I want to move on from that to talk about Zukerberg. It's a lot more fun, Zukerberg. Zukerberg's timelines. Zukerberg, open this up and click. Okay, scroll bar. Okay, so let's go to, no, not yet. Okay. Yeah, I showed you Zuckerberg's, the Zukerberg corpus. Zuckerberg actually had nothing to say. Did you get to see Zukerberg when he gave his webcast about, he uses the word awesome a lot. He's quite the speaker, Mark. Genius, but he needs to give awesome a rest. Okay, so a number of articles come out, a whole bunch of them. Okay, so responding to the proposed changes in Facebook. Facebook has an astonishing penetration. Okay, so people like to talk about the plethora of social media that are out there. That's an illusion. For the most part, people are using Facebook and Twitter. Okay, there are 5 million Canadians, between 5 and 7, depending on who's counting, 5 to 7 on Twitter, and there are 30 million Canadians, and 17 million of us are using Facebook. That's a larger penetration than among our brothers and sisters of the South. Canadians like Facebook, and Canadians are all over Facebook. Anyway, so astonishing penetration. So when changes happen on Facebook, yeah, it's major. It's not, it's right up there with the Beatles breaking up and so forth. It's a major sort of cultural change. Now, Zuckerberg's facing a number of challenges. And one of them is simply updating his program, right? So one of the problems for any existing service is you have lots of people who have lower cost operations for whom innovation is easier to do. If you're Facebook and you have 17 million Canadians, innovation's hard. You get lots of resistance. You also have a huge sunk cost in an existing infrastructure. Innovation's hard. So these lightweight entrepreneurs and so forth are innovating right and left. So what do? Okay, so you imitate. So for example, this happens all the time in the marketplace, right? This sort, well, you can actually see it happen in sailboat races, right? So ever watched a sailboat race where there's one leader and everybody's sort of back here and so forth? And what is this guy up here doing? He's copying everything these guys are doing. Why? Because if somebody catches a gust of wind, okay, that puts them in a favorable position, well, he wants to maintain that lead. He'll do exactly that. People that are ahead tend to imitate those that are following. They're imitating the innovators. Now, the innovators have gotten really innovative lately. In order to keep Facebook up to date, okay, so Zuckerberg is taking risks. And one of his risks was to introduce this timeline regime in which your activities instantly register, right? So before it was, so if you want to share something, you post it in your status updates and so forth. Now, okay, using this sort of what he's calling social operating system, any of your user activity registers in this timeline. Other people can inspect it, and so can you. So you have this accumulating biography of your activities online, which just scares the crap out of me. But he thinks it's great. Oh my God, it's frictionless sharing, he calls it. One of the commentators who show up in my data says basically, yeah, frictionless, that's great, because I really hate it when I share and there's sparks everywhere and smoke and so forth. So frictionless sharing, friction. Okay, so several. Based on my data, okay, so what I discovered was, in terms of keyness, right? Keyness is an empirical property. Sharing ranks 11. Zukerberg ranks like one. Zukerberg's like the devil. But anyway, but ranks at 11. It's a very important term. Organizes a lot of the discourse. Ranks at 11 in terms of keyness in the sample that I gathered. And so what I did was I examined every instance of keyness. Every instance of not keyness, every instance of sharing, to look at what terms are collocating and what themes are collocating. And I basically have 3 here. That is 3 contradictions that everybody's trying to figure out. Nobody's coming to any hard and fast conclusions. The one hard and fast conclusion they're coming to is, we don't like this. A lot of people. There are a few that do. There are a few voices in there saying, yes, I want to share everything all the time. I want to be totally open. Oh, I misspelled anonymity. Anyway, so the first sort of contradiction everybody's dealing with is anonymity, authenticity. Okay, so what does it mean to be authentic online? And they're all talking about this. So if you think 20 years ago, in the research literature on web-based communications and so forth, the big topic was anonymity. If you think about, especially before 1994, but even after 1994, you had people like Pavel Kardas and other writers like Sherry Turkle and so forth, who are huge in human-computer interaction and computer-supported cooperative work. All they wanted to talk about is, inventions of self in these mediated virtual environments. Because of the anonymity, this becomes a possibility. You can actually create your own persona and pursue that your persona and so forth. And that's fantastic. That's wonderful. And because of the poverty of online conditions at the time, it was absolutely necessary. There was really no other way. And you had all these sorts of odd sociological phenomena that obtained because of the conditions of anonymity. Like, so Pavel Kurtis talked about electronic cross-dressing. Because of the demographic skew of the internet at the time, there were just a whole bunch more males. Okay, so and because it was mostly text-based environments and so forth, you would have males presenting as females. And you have females presenting as neuter. They would so because of all the unwanted attention that a person presenting as female would get, they would often select usernames that were gender neutral. Those sorts of sociological phenomena that were observed online have all disappeared. It's reversed itself. Now, it's no longer anonymity that everybody's interested in, it's authenticity. Okay, and the big concern now is not so much, that people can defraud each other, it's privacy, that people are actually seeing too much. Because the new regime of social media is what? It's all about authenticity. And what people will tell you is if you want to perform well online, you have to be authentic. It has to be the real you. You have to post your real pictures. It has to be your real identity. They will tell you that, so the people that study like the performance on Twitter and so forth, people that use their real names outperform people that don't. Authenticity. Well, at what point, however, so this is where the discussion goes. At what point does authenticity become an invasion of privacy? At what point, so if I'm off surfing porn sites, do I really want Timeline to pick that up and share it with everybody on Facebook? Well, probably not. That's a problem. That's an extreme example. But do I want everything? So it did come out a few weeks ago that Zukerberg's Facebook is following you off Facebook. They want to know where you're going. So they can predict where you're going to go when you leave their site, and they can predict where you're coming from when you arrive at their site. That makes a difference to them. Authenticity, anonymity. Again, what Timeline does is it automates sharing, so that wherever you go and so forth is now shareable. No, it's not just shareable. It's shared. It becomes part of your timeline. Agency influence. This is a huge one. This shows up in the question of the integrity of the editorial agent. And what does that mean precisely? So right now, if you want a Twitter feed that just has zillions of followers, if you want a Facebook page that has zillions of followers, what do you have to do? You share really cool stuff. It's sort of like DJs, right? So what do DJs do? Do DJs produce music? Most of them, no. Most of them do what? They find really great music, and you listen to it, and you listen to their playlists, and you share their playlists. DJs are what? They're arbiters of taste. They have the time on their hands to go find the music that you like. You follow certain people because they have the time on their hands to find resources you like. They're aggregating for you. That's why that's the best predictor of performance in social media. Now, some people say, no, it's all about engagement. That's bullshit. It's not about engagement. The top performers, in fact, so the in-house researcher at HubSpot did a study on this. The exact opposite is the case. If you're spending lots of time engaging on Twitter, people are tuning you out. If you're spending lots of time sharing really cool stuff that you're into, that predicts high performance. You'll get lots of followers. Now the problem is, what Zuckerberg's doing, according to a number of people that chime in when they talk about sharing, is he's taking away that editorial agency. He's taking away that selection. What makes when I take something and share it, I have selected it to be shared. If Zukerberg's timeline is doing that for me, that's no longer me. That's registering simply my activity in a stream of shared stuff. And one guy actually comes out and says, this is the death of taste. The death of taste, I love that. That's why I say taste. If you actually go to the concordance, I can show it to you, and look at taste, okay, that's what you'll get. There are several people that talk about this, that what we're doing online, what makes social media, is this aggregating function and this selection function. This is how the community sorts a signal from the noise. And what Zuckerberg's doing is taking that editorial power away from us and trying to monetize it because he's adding, so he's adding the advertising angle. So there's this agency influence. He's taking away our agency in order to do what? To influence us in various ways. And then there's the use value, exchange value. This is the most interesting to me, the most interesting topic of conversation going on among those who are trying to figure this out. Because the big problem, big analytical problem that people who are discussing this can't get beyond is, okay, it's a free service. What are our prerogatives? So a number of them are saying, yeah, it's free, whatever. And a number of them are saying, it's not free. Okay, there's this sort of there's an adage going around online: if you are not paying for the service, you are not the customer. You are the commodity, and that's true on Facebook. What Zuckerberg is selling is you. What Twitter is selling is the analytical, the API, the application programmers interface that allows developers to come in and mine that data that you're developing. Now, in return, you get this great free service, and you're having a great time. But you are paying for it, is what some of the arguers are saying. In fact, one guy comes out and says, I wish, this is brilliant, I love this. He comes out and says, I wish Zuckerberg would allow us to buy out of it. Then we would know what it's worth to him. We would be able to put a price on our contribution. Because at the moment, we can't price this. We don't know what value we're returning to him. And we don't know what so we have no basis for comparison. Use value, yes, this is very useful. But there's also an exchange value component. It's marketable. Stuff is being marketed, and we have no participation in that. So we really have no grounds for an effective critique, is what a number of people are saying. It's quite brilliant. So you have these three sort of discussions going on: anonymity, authenticity, agency, influence, and I think the most important one for any of us that do anything online is, yeah, who's paying for this? Okay, yeah, lots of free stuff, but it means something that you're not paying for it. There is a price for free, is the emerging notion. And the way I'm arriving at these conclusions is by doing what? Okay, so there are different ways to develop qualitative data. Qualitative data is simply text or images. I don't deal in images, so what about images? I'm not going to talk about images. I deal with text. Text is what? Text is unstructured data. What does that mean precisely? Well, it means that you have to impose a structure on it. There are different ways to impose a structure on it. What most people do with qualitative data, when you talk about qualitative data analysis, you're talking about coding. You code data, right? So one way to approach the data that I showed you would be to go through blocks, it would be to code the various themes as they appear. And then you'd code the code. For example, if I, every instance of sharing, and then I go through, okay, and then decide, okay, this instance of sharing, they're talking about X, but it's really Y. This instance of sharing, they're talking about X, but it's a Y and Z and so forth. And then I can actually develop a matrix where I talk about sharing, sharing across one axis and different kinds of sharing down another axis, and this would become my theory for that text, to explain or predict what that text means. That's qualitative research, as it's traditionally construed. What corpus linguistics tools allow you to do, and these tools are, some of them are free, by the way. The concordancer I'm using is not. It costs about $90, but there's a free version I use at home on my Macintosh, because this doesn't work on my Macintosh. So that's quite productive. What corpus linguistics allows you to do is not code. Okay, so it allows the structure of the text itself to reveal itself. Okay, so in other words, yeah, sharing, I could go through and code every instance, but I can also arrive at a profile of sharing on empirical grounds based on word frequencies. That's what I'm doing here. It is much faster. It is empirically more defensible. Why? Because I don't have to come forward with a coding scheme. I don't have to give you Cohen's kappa or signal detection, which are the empirical means of doing what? Developing a case for inter-rater reliability. Instead, I can say, yeah, look, here are my numbers. Came out. Machine. Now, does that in any way take away from my activity as an interpreter? Not at all. What this does is give me grounds for interpretation, empirical grounds for interpretation. Does the machine, does the concordance of software give me anonymity, authenticity? No. Okay, that is a category I developed to describe, so thank you. That is a category I developed to describe what? Patterns that are occurring in the data. Okay, and and that's what I really wanted to, oh, there we go. See, that's the Hubble telescope. Anyway, yeah, just no big deal. I'm done. I'm wrapping up. If you could tell, that's it. And where I want to go with this is this is another way to approach text that can be learned. By the way, if you're interested in textual analysis, there's a whole site that'll walk you through how to perform textual analysis. It's not hard to do. The linguistic notions, yeah, so it takes a little bit of study to master those, but you don't have to master those. Okay, so I tend to approach these texts with linguistic terms in mind, but there are non-linguists who do textual analysis. So again, my purpose was to do what? To show you how you can perform research with texts to arrive at interesting and empirically verifiable, empirically I should say defensible results using corpus linguistics. And now I'm ready to take your questions. If you have you have a question? Yes.
Yeah. If you don't annotate your corpus, are you not missing things like pronouns or, a raw text pattern matching is fine, but it's only part of the picture. So without any kind of annotation that would take that into account, you talked a little bit about lemmatization, but what about things like homography or pronouns that mask the frequency? I'm not sure that frequency alone is enough.
Okay, so no, certainly. So no, you have to add an additional layer of interpretation. Indeed, that's what I do. Yeah, so you identify a lemma, and then if you think about it in terms of say a matrix. Okay, so you have every instance of a term, and then the neighborhood the term appears in. Okay, so I guess I don't know. I guess I don't understand what you mean by, okay, so annotation. I am writing this up, but
like tagging.
Tagging.
Yeah.
Okay, so
you talked about another approach could be to identify themes, and I think you call it coding. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah, annotation. Do you think they could be complementary?
Oh, most definitely. So one of the things I like to do, with Nudist, right? It's not called Nudist anymore. It has a nicer name. In vivo. So identify a textual pattern like sharing. Okay. In vivo actually has a robust indexing function. So you can use that to autocode. You autocode every instance of sharing within the text units, and then you can actually so go through the terms that collocate. And what a concordancing software will do is show you the terms that collocate and autocode those. Okay, and then you can build a dense matrix upon which you can make predictions like, okay, every time this theme appears, that theme appears. Okay, so what can we learn from that? So in other words, yes, they can be complementary, and they should be complementary. This is not but I should say this is probably a faster approach.
But it's not
yeah.
Because I mean,
oh, okay. Right.
It might not. Sometimes they're subject field specific. But what about shares? What if Mark Zukerberg's talking about shares in Facebook? That's a completely different share than the sharing that you're talking about there, and you won't get that with a raw pattern matching. Like you won't be able to distinguish those because
okay,
the
so
computer literally pattern matches.
Right, you are doing pattern matching, but I'm sorry, what would you miss again?
Well, if you're just looking at the frequency of share,
Mm-hmm.
but you're lumping together shares in Facebook,
Like market
sharing.
shares.
Mhm.
Market shares.
Oh, most definitely. So no.
Then you're coming up with a frequency.
Right.
that's totally skewed.
Okay, so no, your frequency is not totally skewed. You're looking at every instance of share. Okay, and what collocates with share to a statistically significant degree. Okay, so yes, you're going to have data that goes off in different directions. You're going to have instances of the term that don't fit the pattern. That doesn't mean there isn't a pattern. That just means that, okay, the speakers use the term in different senses. And that actually can become theoretically interesting. So for example, that's what I talked about with Obama, just frighteningly consistent. So what's interesting to me is when he does depart from his own theme. So it's actually those departures, and those departures do show up.
Yeah,
So it's not, I'm not missing anything. It's, in fact, it's making it more clear when a departure occurs.
I still disagree with the not accounting for homographs and stuff like that.
Okay, so explain to me the term, well, I'm not familiar with homograph.
Two words that look the same but have
Uh-huh.
completely different meanings. So share and share, bank.
Okay,
bank,
so
financial.
but both terms would show up.
Yes.
So how is that?
The frequency count.
Right.
It's a raw count.
Oh, okay, the frequency count. Okay, okay. So what you can do is go into the software and exclude those instances. So that you can technically overcome that. I don't see why you would want to, though. So generally, when I'm going through an analysis, I want those instances that depart from the norm. They're actually theoretically interesting.
I don't think it's a departure from the norm. It's a completely different.
Mm-hmm. I want those completely different.
No, it's not a different usage of the same word. It's a different concept.
I want those different concepts.
I think that's a different type of study.
I want those different kinds of. You're not telling me anything that I. The variation in the use of a term, or even if the term is used in various ways, that's actually interesting to descriptive linguistics, or descriptive. That actually that can tell me about the use of the term. That can actually tell me a whole lot about the social construction of a term. That it can have two different meanings.
But it's not a term; it's a concept. I think that's what I.
Okay, so when I use term and concept, I generally use them interchangeably. So a term, a term is the expression of a concept is the expression of a term. So I guess I don't understand the distinction.
The semantic triangle, I guess, would be the distinction.
The semantic triangle.
I think, from what I'm understanding, and I'm all new to this, it's like the notion of bank and riverbank and the bank where you put your money.
Right.
So you want to differentiate those terms.
Right. And it's easy to do. So you simply exclude one. What you're talking about there is a syntam. So a syntagmatic relation that results in a different meaning. You can exclude that.
Right.
What size of corpus?
But you're saying you don't want to do that.
Okay, so no. So river bank, and if I'm doing a study of bank, right? And
Right.
Obama uses that a lot. So that should, if you know, if I come up with word frequencies, and yeah, he's using river bank. What other cloud bank? Look down. So what other terms? So each one of those instances, yeah. So it's not going to skew the sample. I would simply, so if I was talking about his use of the term banks, I would simply exclude those instances where he uses that.
Okay.
But certainly I don't want to, but that's not meaningful in a corpus.
But you are excluding.
Most definitely.
Okay.
So if somebody's talking about market share,
Sure.
when they're talking about sharing or
Right.
something of that nature, actually that would be a value. I can't think of can you think of a share term that would be, anyway, so I would exclude that from the analysis. I guess I'm not understanding the issue, I suppose.
I guess it wasn't clear to me that you were excluding it because you said you didn't use any annotation. Without part of speech tagging, how are you excluding?
Okay, so for me to exclude a term, I must specifically annotate it?
I mean, well, that's the easiest way, right? That's part of
I
speech
think it's a
tagging.
software issue. You can actually, in the software that you're what instance you may not, it might not be relevant to a particular analysis that you're doing. It's still part of the overall corpus that in a different context of looking at the words it's useful, but you can account for the meaning and the relevance for the instances you're looking for. So that seems to be a software capability and functionality.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm having trouble figuring out. I mean, so are we talking about a technical or a conceptual issue?
I think actually that's the problem. I think that's where people coming from a coding kind of understanding, not familiar with the software, I don't have a clue, I'm just guessing there's a functionality there that easily lets you control for that, so that there's no concern around it. But without us knowing the software, we're having a hard time understanding.
Okay, so I showed you what the corpus looks like, right? The terms are in context. There's no, you're not getting the individual terms. The individual term on its own, as I said, is meaningless to a corpus linguist. It has no meaning. We think in 5 to 7 word bursts. What matters is the collocation of terms around that term. That's what adds meaning and so forth. So it's almost like it sort of contradicts the whole theory itself when you talk about, okay, it's precisely those relationships that we're looking at. We're not looking at the terms themselves. We're looking at how the terms work with other terms in order to create contexts or patterns of meaning.
But where you suppress or discount a different use of the word bank.
Right.
So it's the same thing. You're both addressing the same issue.
Okay.
So let's talk about something new.
Yeah, please. That would be great. Because to be honest, I have no idea what the stakes are in this. So yes.
New topic. Thanks very much for the presentation. I learned a lot. I know nothing about this stuff. I'm thinking about applications for other purposes.
Right.
I work with a research organization, an international organization that sees their main kind of impact pathway as being influencing policy. And it seems that this kind of an approach would be really useful, and they have a hard time demonstrating and showing that they've had an influence, that they've made an impact, that the research has resulted in change somewhere. And it seems to me that this kind of an approach would be really an interesting one to assess whether those research publications, those conferences, have resulted in change at the national or the international policy level. Are you aware of applications of that?
Of course. There are commercial services that do this, so BuzzLogic and ListenLogic, that use these tools to do what? To chart people's attitudes in real time, generally using their conversations that burst out on social media. Okay, so for example, there was a researcher who used a system called Crawdaddy, which uses, it's a very basic concordancing tool, but it to predict the performance of GOP primary candidates in 2008 based on the buzz that surrounded. Okay, so if there was negative buzz based on collocations of negative terms with candidates' names and so forth, and this guy's understanding or this guy's analysis was just frighteningly predictive of, even though if you take the number of social media users with the number of people actually voting, they're askew. They don't. You wouldn't think one would predict the other, but they do. So that's an example of using this sort of analysis with. So thank you. So of using this analysis with social media. But what you seem to be talking about is using this sort of analysis with so like conference proceedings and so forth.
And relating it to government documents, policy.
Okay, so you want to trace the influence of, say, a policy position in later discourse.
Yes.
Okay, so there are several ways you could do that. This would be one of them. So in which case you would be looking not so much at a term or terms, you would be looking at entire themes, I believe. If you're, so in other words, unless you're talking about proper names or something that could be.
I'm hoping that we could. If you could tag, sort of radio tag individual terms, that you could trace back to the original research and show that it flows through and results. Because I mean, there's a lot of different influences on that final policy, right?
Right.
But is there a way to attribute some of it back to the research source?
That's a fascinating problem. Okay, so you have a policy outcome and you want to trace it back to its sources.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's more a forensic analysis rather than predictive.
Right.
Okay, wow. Okay, I don't know of anybody doing precisely that, but I don't. So could you use tools like this to do that? I think you could. But I can't think of a precedent at the moment. Usually what people are doing is trying to predict so movements or trends. It's for anticipation or trend analysis that you use this sort of research. But a forensic analysis where you're trying to trace back, okay, so that sounds more like citation indexing. Citation indexing, there are a number of academics, like, so have you ever heard of Granovetter's Strength of Weak Ties? That is the most cited document in all of academia. How do we know this? From citation indexing. There are people, so if you look at all the citations of everything produced in every journal and so forth and so on, this document, you can trace the pedigree of any idea and so forth based on citations. And Google Scholar can actually help you do that too. And that's the wonderful thing about academic discourse. Unfortunately, journalists and ordinary people don't cite like that. They don't, they're not tracing out their sources. They're not giving you their sources in the same sorts of way. So
I'm just thinking there may be certain sequences of words or terms or associations of the kind that you're talking about that can be traced back. That are peculiar enough or different that you can identify.
Yeah, no. So that using these tools, that would be trivial. Okay, so it would be simply comparing one text, a normative text, say your policy outcome, with other texts, and to find patterns. So it's pattern matching. Pattern matching, but then you're going the additional step of taking your pattern matches and trying to develop trend analysis. Okay, so which of these patterns actually became a trend and then you'd have to develop timelines, right? So that would generally with this sort of study, right? You're taking a bunch of text, aggregating them together in a big batch. It sounds like what you would need to do is somehow attach dates in there so that you could construct some sort of timeline to watch the theme develop until it becomes a policy outcome. Does that make sense? And I don't, I can't think of offhand. That sounds like a fascinating idea, but I can't think of offhand anybody that's done that.
Historians some historiographical research groups might be fooling around with this kind of stuff.
Isabel might have something to say.
Research proposal. This is a fabulous short insight development type of grant where you're looking at a methodology, developing a methodology, or as a tool in this case. But I could see the two of you working together on a short insight grant to actually explore, because it's fascinating, incredibly useful, right, Brian, in terms of what you're proposing, also for your research, right? There'd be incredible application. It's such a tool and process.
Right. What would be the data though? Like conference proceedings, or where are you looking for these themes developing? Would you say?
So, I don't know if we want to take everybody's.
Take that I'll call a meeting.
Talk about it later. But just for example, this organization has done research over the last 15 years in Central Africa, primarily in Cameroon. They think that they've made a difference to the forestry policy. So there's a whole corpus of research publications, of conference proceedings and so on, that summarize the research that's been done and the key themes that they've been trying to promote.
Oh.
And then there's the government policy.
Okay. So if what you're talking about citation indexing, these are academic publications and so forth. That's not hard to do at all.
Some of them are, but some of it's some of it goes through the peer-reviewed press, but a lot of it is offline. And I think that a lot of the real influence comes not from the publications.
Oh no, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. So, but is this influence taking the form of text, or is it face-to-face? I mean, so
some of it's documented in the conferences.
Okay. So if you have text data, okay, so say the messaging that goes on, at the conferences and so forth, conference proceedings themselves, where you have, I would see like about 3 data sets, right? You have the informal correspondences, the email lists, or the so forth, the proceedings themselves, and then the policy statements. You sort them into into a timeline. Okay, so this body of text, this body of text, this body of text, where this is so many months and so forth, and then perform this sort of analysis. So on each set, in order to come up with a number of data points you could compare, yes, that would work, and that would be when I say trivial, I simply mean technically not
Yes.
hard,
Yeah.
trivial to do.
Yeah.
So thank you, Isabel.
Should I call meeting?
You know I love meetings.
Well known for loving it.
Yeah,
Okay.
but so that would be and the software's free, and I could help you do it.
Yeah.
It's well, one of the software packages is free, and I could. I could help you do it.
Yeah.
So if that's
Yeah,
if the data is already the hard part is the text. If you already have the text, no problem. Yes, let's go for it. But and the citation indexing part is not hard, but it's a different technique. So and it's not one that I'm familiar with, but the people that do citation indexing talk about exactly what you're talking about. So they will look at like a source text. Say some influential article, and then talk about, okay, so here's a set of articles that harken back to it and so forth through various sources and so forth. Well, how has this idea changed over time? And or how is it contributing to our new understanding and so forth? So citation indexing actually does exactly that, but it's not impossible. It's far more defensible when you're talking about academics, because academics cite everything, and when they don't, they get expelled.
Okay, thanks.
They plagiarize. That's when academics go bad. What is your name?
Brian
Brian?
Belcher.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll get in touch with you after I'll be meeting with them in a week or two.
Okay.
And I'll see what kind of text is available.
Yeah. Okay, that would be wonderful. Yes.
Hi. Sort of inspired by your use of Homer and the Bible as early examples. How does this have any added value in assessing the quality of things like translations and particularly say the Bible translated by many different people in many different ways?
Yeah.
Can you use it to sort of assess which ones are the more or authentic or accurate? And perhaps this is a related question: how does this work with sort of different languages? I mean, for example, the tonal languages of China, places like that. Does it work in the same kind of way?
Those are all really good questions. So the English language is sort of optimized for this sort of thing, because we word order is really important to us. So subject, verb, object is, and if you scramble an English sentence, it doesn't make any sense. Highly inflected languages, you can scramble a Latin sentence and it still makes sense. This is why Latin poetry is so much outperforms English poetry. Inflected languages present more of a problem for this kind of linguistics, because when you're looking at word frequencies, or collocations, you'll talk about so you have a head word, and then so a certain term will, whether a term collocates one or two terms beyond, is meaningful. Does it collocate next to it, on the right or the left? Does it collocate over here? This is what a quick view will give you. So with inflected languages, the data you derive from those frequencies is different. So that would be the answer to that. There was one study using corpus linguistics where they were trying to date. There's a big problem with Shakespeare's plays, right? Which one he wrote first, and which one after this, and so forth. We know that we know the order of certain ones. We don't know the orders of others, and so forth. So using just standard corpus linguistic tools, based on word frequencies, and based on the theory that Shakespeare himself was an actor, right? So when he was acting one play, he was actually writing another, and the theory was and we know what parts he played from the playbills, right? So they could say, so given that he's reciting these lines every night, he's a working class actor, so he was reciting these lines every night, like 3 times a night, let's guess that because he's reciting those words, that they're going to appear to an inordinate degree in the next play he's writing, because they're first and foremost in his mind. And so that became the algorithm using corpus linguistics tools to figure out, so what's the next play he wrote based on the word frequencies he's using in the lines that he's reciting in this play. And based on that, they came up with an order, and they tested the order against what we know is the case, and it predicted what we know is the case. Now, it's become canonical. with respect to texts like the Bible or Homer's corpus and so forth, this is where this comes from, right? This is the big problem with so the big problem with the Bible, right? So perhaps you're familiar with the JEPD theory. Tradition tells us Moses wrote the Pentateuch, right? Even though it's written at the end that God buried Moses, right? So apparently he was writing as he went down, right? He wrote in his own burial. And God buried me. Oh, damn. Now, so we know that, you know, he probably didn't write it. Or if he did, he didn't write that part. You know, somebody. So German linguists and textualists in the 1850s, using not computer, they discovered that there are stylistic variations that are consistent over passages. And these tend to organize themselves around different points of view. The JEPD theory is like, you know, there's a Yahwist, there's an Elohist, there's a Deuteronomist, JEPD, Yahwist, anyway, so there are four of them. And what it appears that the Pentateuch is a compilation of texts that were harmonized at a certain point. And yes, these tools confirm that just based on word frequencies that can pick up stylistic variations, yeah, there is empirical grounds to say that the Pentateuch was multiply authored, was of a plural authorship that probably took place over time, just because there's a richer vocabulary in some of those variations than in others, which might suggest a later date for some of the you know. And there's also evidence that scribal sort of marginal glosses got worked into the text and so forth. And yes, these sorts of tools can detect that very easily. You know, she was talking about so homographs and lemmatization and so forth. These sorts of things just jump right out at you in a text when you're doing an aggregate. If somebody's using terms in a non-standard way, or terms show up that just aren't there, right? So terms show up in one place that don't show up anywhere else. That's, you know, that shows up because that term will not, you know, will not be used frequently. It'll be used in a way that's its statistical profile with respect to other terms will be non-standard and easy to detect. So a lot of texts that we thought of as normative, like, you know, so there's the Platonic, you know, Plato's text and so forth, or Aristotle and so forth, where some of the texts we know them to be corrupt. Okay, and the problem for textual analysts is figuring out, okay, so what are the marginal glosses? What are the copyist editors? What are the stuff that, you know, the stuff that got written later and stuck in the text and so forth? How can we arrive at, you know, the purest form of the text we know of? These tools will help you do that, yes. And did I answer?
The other question was specifically about translating.
Oh, translating. Yeah. So yeah, that's beyond my ken. Now, take the problem of biblical narration, right? So there are different kinds of narration, translation, I should say, right? So paraphrase translations. There's word-for-word translations. So different regimes or different ways of translating. So can this help you test say, the fidelity of a translation? I don't think so. One, because there are different kinds of translation. Two, because of because sometimes a word-for-word translation can just be misleading. You need a paraphrase, an amplification with other terms, sometimes to arrive at something that's close to the original intent of the meaning. And I don't think there's a way you can automate that. On the other hand, there are empirical sorts of tests can give you indications. Okay, for example, take a part of speech that's universal throughout, you know, like a pronoun or something. You know, pronouns tend to be thematized. You can, on empirical grounds, talk about the point of view of a text simply based on how pronouns are thematized. You can also empirically verify the genre of a text, say if it's a narrative, based on the presence of temporal markers, like, you know, whether it's before, after this book, so you can use these tools to say, okay, so this is definitely a narrative, and this translation captures that narrative content. Because why? The presence of temporal markers in both. Or this has a point of view that, a single subject, reliable narrator point of view, so does this, okay? So if you're talking about this broad general categories that you'd probably be able to read to figure out anyway, you can empirically verify those. But can you verify, say, the fidelity of a translation? That's a really vexed. So in my discipline, we follow this guy named Hans-Georg Gadamer, who basically tells you that every translation is a new text. There are no translations. It's just different various degrees of new texts. That so every variation of this is Barbara Herrnstein Smith, who's a narrativist I love. Basically, she does a study with every possible variation of Cinderella, which is a narrative that occurs in just a billion different languages and a billion different cultures and so forth. It's just a very popular folktale. Her conclusion at the end is, because there's really no way to say, okay, is there a core text? This is what linguists were struggling with. There must be an text, right? There has to, that we can reconstruct from all these variations. And her notion, and this is the notion I hold to, no, these are all new texts. It's a theme, and you can say it's a theme, but a theme, you can't say there's a normative theme upon which they're all based. No, it is a theme that emerges from all these texts. And and forgive me for that digression. Just any opportunity I get to mention Barbara Herrnstein Smith is am I being anyway. Those are great questions, by the way. I love to talk about this stuff, and nobody ever asked me about it. Any other really great questions before I should let you guys go? It's
way over time.
Yeah, way over time.
Yeah. I don't suppose there are any image concordancers, are there?
No. So I don't do images. So if you're interested in images, it's all about metadata, and that's where you're actually implanting descriptive content into the image. Google is experimenting with apps that will identify stuff. Like I have one of my friends had this. Took a picture of a battery on my table, and it's like, and Google found a match for it, and it will do pattern matching with images, and so I guess there's work going on in that regard, but I have no idea how you would apply that to an empirical study.
Yeah, and the spatial dimensions of the meaning of the image, and all those things. Yeah.
Well, if you're interested,
just curious, just that maybe there's a magic Star Trek gadget out there.
Wouldn't that be great?
Thank you.
Thank you guys.